Welcome back. You're listening to the Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion. In the days leading up to last year's war in Libya, Britain, France and other NATO countries were preparing a bombing campaign, but the White House and the US Department of Defense were preparing another type of attack. Should they deploy their cyber arsenal against the Libyan air defense system? Their answer was no, but that the question was posed at all shows how much warfare is changing. Two examples of cyber attacks that actually took place are the Stuxnet worm that damaged Iran's nuclear program and Israel's cyber attack in 2007, which blinded the Syrian air defense system so the Israelis could bomb a military target without being detected. Joining me to discuss the future of cyber warfare is Alan Calder, CEO of IT Governance, specialist on information security. I'm also joined by Marcus Ranum, Chief Security Officer for Tenable Network Security. They're creators of vulnerability scanners for worldwide networks. Jack Schofield is computer editor for The Guardian. Chris Bellamy, a security expert and Professor of Maritime Security at the University of Greenwich. And Joshua Pennell, founder of IOA Active, a company which offers computer security services. I'm just going to start with you, Chris. Could you explain to our listeners what is a cyber weapon?
Definitions do vary, of course, but one very good definition, which was presented by an American naval commander 15 years ago, is cyber war is war in which information is the target, the weapon, and the means of delivery all at the same time. So what we're really talking about here is computer against computer and the denial of or the swamping with information.
When is it likely that these cyber weapons are going to be used?
Well, I think the most obvious time to use them would actually be before or indeed instead of some sort of kinetic conventional war. And we saw examples of that as long ago as 1998. Ramos Horta, the East Timorese independence leader, threatened the Indonesians with cyber attacks from a bunch of hackers based in Australia and elsewhere. So I think we could see it in concert with conventional military operations, but I also think we could see it instead of. And of course, this is where this crucial advantage of cyber war is that you don't necessarily know who's attacking you, so you can't immediately retaliate.
Marcus Ranum, just to come to you now, you're a Chief Security Officer for Tenable Network Security. How damaging can cyber weapons be for organizations?
Well, they could potentially be very damaging. I suppose it depends on how good the target's underlying security is, and it depends on what's being attacked and the ability of the target to be put back on its feet again after an attack. I think the place that we're all mostly concerned about are situations where you've got process control systems that might allow somebody to do physical real-world damage to some kind of a critical system. I think one of the important points to make about this, though, is if you're bombing a military target, it's fairly easy to say, well, that's a truck and it's camouflaged and it's got enemy markings on it. But a great deal of the targets that are on the table in cyber attacks are actually civilian infrastructure that is used to support military activities or military targets. So one of the problems, if we talk about attribution, is that we may actually be looking at implicitly cyber war crimes, if you will.
Joshua, if I come to you, when are cyber weapons likely to be used? Why would a country or an operator want to go for a cyber weapon rather than your normal standard conventional weaponry?
I think there's a lot of different, quote-unquote, benefits of the cyber war efforts, and one of which is it's far less costly to develop cyber weapon capabilities versus, building up kinetic missiles, tanks, aircraft, etc. I think a lot of nations are turning to their people and, finally going through and figuring out who can actually do this work and then grooming them up over a period of years to really, in essence, become that cyber army.
How easy is it to use a cyber weapon? Is it likely to be the work of a lone ranger, or do we need the resources of a country?
Cyber weapons could be a one-man war. There are plenty of hackers who, are capable of both developing cyber weapons and of buying in components. So one person could, or one terrorist organization could mount an attack, even if they couldn't write all the pieces. There are lots of things available on the dark market. You can buy rootkits and virus kits and assemble things, supplied by freelancers on a global basis. Some of them even come with, guarantees and, terms and conditions. It's a real market.
Chris Bellamy from the University of Greenwich.
Yes, of course. The more computers you have to fire these cyber weapons at the target, the easier it is, particularly if you're talking about overwhelming it with the volume of data. And you may recall that there was some sort of cyber attack on, I think it was Estonia a couple of years ago, and it was calculated that maybe 100,000 computers around the world would have been needed to produce that volume of information which submerged the information infrastructure for a while.
Kind of the most common type of attack that we hear about, this attack where a server is overloaded. Are there any other ways that are more common? And are we at the level yet where we can expand our cyber warfare, where we could possibly shut down a whole country?
One of the things you can do, and this is stretching the boundaries of cyber warfare, is of course to take out the servers, and you could do that with more conventional methods, and that's where this definition of cyber warfare expands to cover kinetic attack. The other things you can do, of course, are rather than swamping the target with information, to actually prevent the target communicating itself. And of course the crucial thing, which has been going on in warfare since the beginning of warfare, is putting the wrong information across it. So it's disinformation, the wrong messages are being sent, and that of course is possibly the most dangerous, because you don't know whether the information you're getting is actually the right information.
Alan, you're from IT governance. The way that we use cyber weaponry at the moment, do you think that it can go beyond the distributed denial of service attacks to possibly shut down entire countries or entire infrastructure, such as, say, the national grid in the UK?
I think you have to see cyber warfare in its context. It's not a method of waging and winning a war which can be done on its own. The Chinese PLA's doctrine of cyber warfare recognizes that cyberspace is the kind of fifth dimension to a war. And if you want to take down the infrastructure of a country, you need to do more than simply attack the SCADAs and the controllers and the servers, because the country you're attacking will have resilience arrangements in place. It will have a number of other alternatives in place. And while it might be easier to take down a small country, it's a lot more difficult to take down a big country. And so the sort of military approach would be to assess what the overall objective of the exercise is, and to deploy cyber weapons to achieve specific targets in the context of a broader political aim.
We've heard about a number of cyber attacks that have been used. We've heard about the Stuxnet worm. We're not really sure where that originated from. We know about Israel's cyber attack in 2007. We know about the Estonia one. If I come to you, Joshua, who would you say are the main countries involved in this, the main adversaries that are playing in the cyber war at the moment?
That's a good question. I guess maybe to rephrase it is more like who's not in the game right now. Last I read, is about 120 different entities that are involved in government-sponsored offensive capability development and whatnot. And I think talking about what you had spoken on earlier about how it actually would go in and disrupt a nation. People have attacked, things like Wall Street and the FTSE, and financial disruption's a big one. Going after air traffic control, trains, planes, all of that it's all within the scope of anything that's controlled by a computer. Which, if you really dig into our world, everything's got a chip and some memory associated with it that's running things. So that's in scope.
Marcus, are you aware of any other countries that are possibly behind cyber warfare that we're not so well aware of at the moment?
Well, I think he's right that pretty much everybody's involved, and one of the things we really need to look at carefully is if you look at the analysis that's been done of Stuxnet, the Stuxnet worm encoded specific, highly classified information about the layout of the Iranian enrichment facility at Natanz, and it also had some extremely detailed information about the nuclear reactor at Bashir in it. So we know this is information that was fed to whoever the authors were by an intelligence agency that had some national level capabilities. So the question there is, is this an economic spoiling attack, or is this state-sponsored terrorism? What is this stuff? It all sounds incredibly clean and harmless until you start thinking about the fact that you're attacking the cooling pump systems of a nuclear reactor.
We've discussed so far in nuclear weapons. We've discussed the anonymity. And the nature of the internet is essentially that it is anonymous. So when we come to try and regulate the use of cyber weaponry, it doesn't seem that it could be so easy, because you can make it look like it came from somewhere else. If I come to you, Chris, it's not very easy to find out who is responsible, because you can make it look like it came from another country, another person. Is there a way that we can regulate cyber warfare?
If you're thinking in terms of some sort of international treaty to ban cyber warfare in the way that we have agreements relating to nuclear weapons and chemical weapons, and so I would think it was much more difficult, in part because, of course, the cutting edge of information capability and cyber capability is not actually with the military. It's elsewhere, and to some extent, militaries have since these systems first developed, they've built their systems to be resilient. And I think, although a lot of the discussion talks about attacks related to military capabilities, actually the greater worry, and this is maybe why governments don't talk about it, is a straightforward attack on the general information of infrastructure of a country or countries. You're quite right that it is incredibly difficult to track down where these cyber attacks came from, and I think in many cases people still don't really know. Of course, you can guess just based on who have you had an argument with recently, and that of course also makes it incredibly difficult to take any kind of retaliatory action, because one thing you can't do is hit the wrong person.
A reminder that you're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion on the future of cyber warfare. If I come to you, Jack, do you think it is going to be a lot easier to try and regulate cyber warfare and try and regulate the use of weapons in the same way that we do at the moment with conventional weaponry?
No, I think it'll be absolutely impossible. The actual cyber warfare element is just a kind of very thin skin on the top of a huge amount of more interesting, in some respects, activity, which is basically economic. So if you are a Chinese manufacturer, one of the things you want to do is get all the blueprints and all the plans and all the designs and specifications and planning materials from your US competitors. If you're in the UK at GCHQ, which has been for decades monitoring traffic going around, you want to know what's going on, So the actual disruption of something is kind of a last resort, or possibly an accidental effect of a much larger type of information gathering war, if you like, because really just knocking over a few computers isn't that big a deal, but getting government plans, look at the effect that WikiLeaks has had, both politically and ultimately possibly economically.
Alan, if I come to you, how easy do you think it will be to try and regulate cyber weaponry?
Completely impossible. The reality is that the weapons that are being used are used at a low level by hackers and at a high level by extremely experienced, able, well-funded organizations with the skills to penetrate significant and sophisticated defenses. Cyber warfare is in some way a misnomer because it's simply one aspect of the use of cyber techniques and skills to gather information and to disinform the enemy. And that gathering information could be, as other people have said, economic. It could be about competitor information. It could be activity which is carried out by criminals for their own ends. And if one focuses just on the cyber warfare aspect, you miss out on the broader range of issues which affect all organizations, and none of which is capable of being controlled by treaty or regulation.
Is there a worry then that if we do have this weaponry available, which can be very destructive, that we can't regulate it at all?
We can't regulate it at all now.
Chris, I come to you. That is hugely worrying. We have a weaponry available, an arsenal available, that we just can't regulate.
Well, in a sense, it's no different from when people started printing books in the 15th century. That here was a way of mass producing information and influencing people, and that had a huge effect on the conflicts of the time. And we now live in an era where everybody is dependent on, and everything we do is controlled by computers and by information transmitted by computers, and therefore that is the medium in which warfare will be conducted. We had land, we had sea, we had air, we had space, and now we've got the fifth dimension, which is cyberspace. And war is going to be conducted there, but it's going to be conducted in the other four dimensions as well.
Jack?
Yeah.
One of the interesting things is that you have a lot of Russian hackers and Bulgarian hackers who are very happy to supply both sides. Exploits are worth money. Computer exploits are worth money. They are saleable. They can be used. They can be purchased, as I was saying earlier, on the black market. They can be used by either side. And interestingly, Eastern European countries such as AVG and Kaspersky in Moscow are among the ones that are leading the defences. So you've got a whole bunch of black hats and a whole bunch of white hats, and there's a certain amount of movement between the two. There's a grey area.
It's even more interesting, on top of what Jack just mentioned, is they've actually set up the marketplaces, the exploit marketplace, in a way where the highest government bidder gets access to the exploit for the first 30 days, and then they have a tiered approach. So the second to third bidders that come in get it 60 days after, and so it's like an arms race within. And these companies, this is what the market that they're artificially manufacturing is happening over in France and Argentina right now.
Because the thing is, cyber weaponry isn't just used against countries. It is, at the moment, we have seen it being used against, Iranian nuclear infrastructure. We've seen it being used against air defense systems. But how is it being used on a smaller scale, maybe into governmental or to other organizations?
Right now, the other thing we should probably talk about, and this touches on your point, is the supply chain security issue. So a lot of our gadgets and computers and whatnot, they're manufactured across seas, right? There's nothing stopping that manufacturer from putting in a subtle yet significant backdoor in the silicon or the software that's been shipped on the devices. So countries like the U.S., some of the intelligence folks right now are thinking about firing back up the chip foundries because there's no way to supply. In their world, there's no way to guarantee the securing of those things that make our computers work.
Alan, you obviously you're specialist on information security. You obviously advise the organisations that you work with about how to keep their information secret. How easy is it to try and keep your information secret, and how much of a problem is cyber weaponry for your organisations that you work with?
It's a challenge for them, and it's a challenge for them because the boards of most of those organizations still haven't got their heads around the fact that the value of their organization sits in their information systems. They don't defend them. They don't have structured approaches to defend them, and simply selling them a couple of £1 million worth of hardware makes them feel good, but doesn't defend them against a sustained phishing attack, for instance. The key thing for large organizations is that they're under attack from what are known as advanced persistent threats. Government-level organizations with sophisticated weaponry carrying out attacks over long periods of time, designed not to be found out, using a mix of techniques from technology, software, and social engineering to embed themselves inside organizations and extract valuable information. And as a certain large Japanese organization discovered, having your international games network hacked doesn't appear to lead you to protect your musical assets either. And that's the challenge that organizations have. They simply don't understand the size of what they're dealing with.
Marcus, you have created a vulnerability scanner at your organization. Alan's just said that it basically, and what you're creating, doesn't defend against sustained phishing attacks. Does that render your scanner basically redundant?
No, the problem is a broad spectrum problem. If you've got vulnerabilities in your systems, that means that somebody from the outside can just exploit those vulnerabilities and walk right in. And one of the reasons that that the attackers are using techniques like phishing, basically just it's a mental attack really more than it is anything else, is because some of the companies that are doing decent vulnerability remediation, they've managed to harden their outside, and so what that's done is that's caused other avenues of attack to become attractive. The important point about all this is that the attackers are going to go with whatever works. And if what works today is phishing attacks, then we're going to see lots of phishing. And if what works tomorrow is triggering buffer overruns in people's websites because they don't manage their software well, then that's where the attacks are going to go. The attacker's objective is not to create a beautiful artwork in the course of penetrating your network. They're going to go for whatever's the simplest and most effective way of getting in with a minimal likelihood of being detected and blocked.
When it comes to trying to attack smaller companies, how much resource does it require?
Well, that's really a point. I think a lot of the smaller companies, they have a small IT department. I spend a lot of time at conferences talking to other IT security people and CSOs, and I've seen everything from some of my friends at General Electric who have a security team that's in the just under 100 range in terms of staff, but I would say that most of the small companies, if they have a security guy, he's the security guy, and that's what he does. And so you've got one individual who's extremely busy, and depending on where he's focused or she's focused at any given time, that can be a problem. People have to sleep.
Chris, if I come to you, does it mean then that the more resources we pour in, the greater threat this cyber weapon becomes? And therefore, if we look at a country scale, if we invest thousands of people, thousands of soldiers into one elite unit, we could have a very deadly weapon on our hands.
Well, as I've said, I don't think that military targets are necessarily the thing we should really be focusing on. I think we should be looking at threats to the entire national or infrastructure, or even the infrastructure of major political organisations like the EU, for example. Militaries will look after themselves. They traditionally have this propensity to over-insure and to gold-plate everything anyway. I think when we're discussing cyber war, we have focused quite a lot on countries and the big countries that are clearly investing a lot in information security and cyber war. And of course, we've had the news that Russia is going to create a cyber command. The Chinese did this a while ago, and the Americans did it a while ago. Cyber warfare, or the ability to cyber attack, above all, it's a gift for Blofeld. It's a gift for the non-state actor who has got the financial means to buy expertise and to buy lots of teenage hackers and keep them in all the things that will keep them happy, but could do terrible damage, whether to countries or whether to other organisations. And that's another angle where I think cyber war may lead to new forms of conflict.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. My thanks to my guests, Alan Calder, CEO of IT Governance, Marcus Ranham, Chief Security Officer for Tenable Network Security, Joshua Pennell, founder of IOA Active, Jack Schofield, technology journalist for The Guardian, and Chris Bellamy, Professor of Maritime Security at the University of Greenwich.